The golden rays of sunset streamed through the enormous windows of the penthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Vivian Hargrove sat motionless in her favorite armchair, her elegant fingers tracing the edge of an envelope that had just arrived. Inside was the confirmation that would change everything. Her appointment with Dr. Nathaniel Chen was scheduled for tomorrow morning. After 12 years of silence, she had made the decision that not a single soul in her family knew about. The surgery to restore her hearing would be her most carefully guarded secret. Vivian's silver hair caught the fading sunlight as she gazed at the family photographs arranged meticulously on the mantelpiece. Her late husband, William, smiled back at her from their wedding photo taken 45 years ago. He had been gone for 8 years now, leaving her with their successful real estate empire, 2 daughters who had grown distant, and a world shrouded in silence after a progressive hearing loss that had culminated in complete deafness 12 years ago. Mrs. Hargrove, Ruby Diaz appeared in the doorway, her hands moving in the familiar patterns of American Sign Language that she had learned when Vivian first lost her hearing. "Your tea." Vivian smiled gratefully as Ruby set down the teacup. Unlike her daughters, Ruby had taken the time to learn proper sign language rather than resorting to impatient gestures and hastily scribbled notes. In the 30 years Ruby had worked for the Hargrove family, she had transitioned from housekeeper to Vivian's most trusted confidant. "Thank you, Ruby." Vivian signed back, her movements graceful and precise. She hesitated, then continued signing. "I need to tell you something important, but you must promise absolute secrecy." Ruby's kind eyes widened with concern as she sat down across from Vivian. "Of course, Mrs. Hargrove. Always." Vivian handed her the envelope. "I'm having surgery tomorrow, an experimental procedure that might restore my hearing." Ruby's mouth fell open as she read the medical documents. "But this is wonderful news. Why keep it secret from Miss Brooke and Miss Tessa?" A shadow passed over Vivian's face as she signed her response. "I have my reasons. I want you to take me to the appointment. Tell everyone I'm visiting my sister in Chicago if they ask." The intercom buzzed, interrupting their conversation. Ruby checked the security monitor and sighed. "Your daughters and their husbands are here for dinner. Earlier than expected." Vivian nodded, quickly tucking the envelope into her desk drawer before smoothing down her cashmere sweater. Family dinners had become increasingly tense affairs in recent months. Brooke and Tessa visited more frequently since William's death, but Vivian couldn't shake the feeling that their attentiveness had more to do with her $80 million estate than genuine concern for her well-being. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, and her family burst in with the usual flurry of air kisses and exaggerated gestures. Brooke, her eldest at 41, strode in first with her signature confidence, designer handbag swinging from her arm. Her husband Pierce followed, his sharp eyes immediately scanning the room as if mentally appraising its contents. Tessa entered more hesitantly, offering a small wave, while her husband Griffin strolled in with his hands in his pockets, eyeing the art collection. "Mother!" Brooke mouthed with exaggerated clarity, a habit Vivian found simultaneously patronizing and unnecessary. She could read lips quite well after years of practice. Brooke bent down to kiss Vivian's cheek, her expensive perfume nearly overwhelming. "You look wonderful." Vivian nodded, reaching for the notepad she kept nearby, her primary means of communication with family members who never bothered to learn sign language. She wrote quickly, "Lovely to see you all. Dinner is ready." Ruby gestured toward the dining room, where she had prepared Vivian's famous roast recipe. As they moved toward the table, Vivian couldn't help but notice how Pierce and Griffin exchanged meaningful glances. Something was brewing beneath the surface. She could sense it in the tense set of their shoulders and the overly cheerful smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. The dinner progressed as usual, with Vivian watching her family talk amongst themselves, occasionally turning to include her with simplified comments and exaggerated gestures. She nodded and smiled when appropriate, scribbling short responses on her notepad. Years of lip-reading had made her adept at following conversations, though her family rarely remembered this fact. "So, Mother," Brooke began, making sure Vivian could see her lips clearly, "we've been thinking about your properties in the Hamptons. They must be such a burden to manage." Vivian raised an eyebrow and wrote, "My management company handles everything efficiently." Pierce leaned forward, his corporate smile firmly in place. "But wouldn't it be easier to transfer some of those responsibilities? Perhaps put some properties in Brooke and Tessa's names? For tax purposes, of course." Ah, there it was, the real reason for tonight's visit. Vivian had suspected as much when the dinner invitation came suddenly yesterday. She wrote a non-committal response about considering their suggestion and watched as relief flooded Pierce's face. When dessert was served, Griffin asked for more wine, prompting Vivian to rise and head toward the kitchen for another bottle. As she passed through the swinging door, she paused, remaining out of sight, but able to see her family through the crack between the door and frame. Without her present, they dropped all pretenses. "God, this is exhausting," Brooke sighed, slumping in her chair, having to speak so slowly and write everything down. "It's like dealing with a child." "At least she's considering the property transfer," Pierce replied, loosening his tie. "If we can get the Hamptons houses in your name before she changes her will again, that's $5 million each, minimum." Griffin nodded, shoving a forkful of dessert into his mouth. "Did you see how confused she looked when we mentioned the tax benefits? I bet she doesn't even understand half of what we're saying anymore. Age and isolation haven't been kind. Tessa at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. She's still sharp, Griffin. Don't underestimate her." "Oh, please," Brooke scoffed. "She's a lonely old woman who can't even hear. How would she know what we're planning? Pierce has been moving money from her smaller accounts for months, and she hasn't noticed a thing." Vivian felt her heart constrict painfully in her chest. Though she had suspected her family's motives weren't pure, the blatant manipulation and theft came as a shock. She steadied herself against the wall, her knuckles white as she gripped the doorframe. Ruby appeared at her side, concerned eyes taking in Vivian's ashen face. "Mrs. Hargrove? Are you all right?" Vivian composed herself quickly and signed, "I'm fine, just tired. Please tell them I'm not feeling well and need to rest." Ruby nodded, understanding instantly. She returned to the dining room to deliver the message, while Vivian retreated to her bedroom, her mind reeling from what she had witnessed. Later that night, as the penthouse fell silent, Vivian sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection. The woman who gazed back had weathered many storms, building a business empire alongside William, raising 2 daughters, and adapting to a world without sound. She had survived it all with grace and dignity, but now a new resolve hardened in her eyes. Tomorrow's surgery wasn't just about regaining her hearing. It was about uncovering the full truth of what had been happening behind her back. As she prepared for bed, Vivian realized that her deafness, long considered her greatest vulnerability, might soon become her most powerful advantage. For the first time in years, a smile played at the corners of her lips, not the polite, accommodating smile her family was accustomed to, but one of determination. They believed her isolated, diminished, and easy to manipulate. They had no idea what was coming. The alarm clock beside her bed was set to vibrate at 5 in the morning. The surgery was scheduled for 7:30. By this time tomorrow, Vivian Hargrove would be hearing the world again, and her family would have no idea. Let them continue their scheming, their patronizing behavior, their secret conversations. Soon, very soon, nothing would escape her notice. She slipped under the silk sheets, her mind already formulating a plan. The hearing would return, but the silence would remain. A strategic silence that would reveal exactly who her family had become in the shadows of her presumed disability. Tomorrow would be the beginning of her quiet revolution. The steady beeping of medical equipment filled the pristine room at the Hamilton Clinic, an exclusive medical facility nestled in the outskirts of the city. Vivian lay perfectly still on the operating table, her silver hair tucked neatly beneath a surgical cap. The anesthesia was beginning to take effect, creating a pleasant warmth that spread through her limbs. Dr. Nathaniel Chen's face appeared above her, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners as he spoke. "Count backward from 10, Mrs. Hargrove," he instructed, his lips moving clearly enough for her to read. Vivian nodded slightly, her eyelids growing heavy. 10, 9, 8. The world faded to black as the surgical team prepared to perform the groundbreaking procedure that promised to reconnect her with the world of sound. Hours later, Vivian awoke in a private recovery suite, the afternoon sun casting dappled patterns through the blinds. Her head was bandaged, and a peculiar pressure filled her ears. Ruby sat vigilantly beside the bed, her weathered hands clutching a worn paperback novel. When she noticed Vivian stirring, she immediately set the book aside and leaned forward. "Mrs. Hargrove?" Ruby signed, her face etched with concern. "How are you feeling?" Vivian blinked slowly, taking inventory of her body. There was discomfort, but no real pain. Before she could respond, the door opened, and Dr. Chen entered, clipboard in hand. Ruby stood respectfully, moving to the side to give the doctor space. "Mrs. Hargrove," Dr. Chen said, his voice careful and measured as he approached the bed. "The procedure went extremely well. Better than we anticipated, actually." Vivian stared at him, suddenly realizing something extraordinary. She could hear him. The sound was muffled, as though she were underwater, but unmistakably present. After 12 years of silence, the human voice had returned to her world. Tears sprang to her eyes as she registered the soft hum of the air conditioning, the rustle of the doctor's lab coat, the gentle beeping of monitors. Sounds she had resigned herself to never experiencing again. "I can hear you," she whispered, her own voice strange to her ears. 12 years of speaking without auditory feedback had altered her speech patterns, making her words slightly slurred and her volume control imperfect. "I can actually hear you." Dr. Chen's face broke into a wide smile. "That's excellent news. We weren't expecting auditory response this quickly. The microchip implants combined with the nerve regeneration therapy have clearly taken immediate effect." Ruby gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks as she witnessed the miracle unfolding before her. "Oh, Mrs. Hargrove, the sounds will be muffled for the next 24 to 48 hours, Dr. Chen continued, checking Vivian's vital signs. "As the swelling decreases, clarity will improve dramatically. By this time tomorrow, you should be experiencing about 70% of normal hearing capacity, and within a week, we expect that to reach 90% or higher." Vivian couldn't stop the tears flowing freely down her face. "I never truly believed. Even when I decided to do this, I never really thought." Dr. Chen patted her hand gently. "The technology has advanced tremendously in recent years. Your type of hearing loss was particularly suitable for this procedure." He adjusted one of the monitors and continued, "Now, I must emphasize the importance of protecting your ears in these early days. Loud noises could be jarring and potentially damaging. Take things slowly. Reintroduce sounds gradually." Vivian nodded, still overwhelmed by the symphony of ordinary sounds filling the room, the soft squeak of the doctor's shoes against the floor, the distant chime of an elevator, the gentle clink of medical instruments. "When can I go home?" she asked, already thinking of her next steps. "We'll keep you overnight for observation, but you should be able to leave tomorrow morning. Is there someone who can stay with you for the first few days?" Ruby stepped forward. "I'll be with her, Doctor." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "Excellent. I'll be back to check on you this evening. For now, rest. Your brain is working overtime to process sensory input it hasn't received in years." After the doctor left, Vivian turned to Ruby, who was still wiping away tears of joy. "Remember, not a word to anyone about this. As far as my family knows, I've been visiting my sister." Ruby nodded solemnly. "Of course, Mrs. Hargrove. But may I ask why? This is miraculous news. Wouldn't your daughters be happy for you? Vivian's expression hardened slightly. Based on what I overheard at dinner last night, I'm not so sure. I need time to understand exactly what's been happening behind my back. The next morning, Vivian was discharged with a small bag of medications and strict instructions for follow-up care. As Ruby drove her back to the penthouse, Vivian marveled at sounds she had forgotten. The purr of the car engine, the gentle whoosh of tires against asphalt, the click of the turn signal. The world had become so much richer overnight, painted with an auditory palette she had long resigned herself to living without. Your daughters called the house phone twice, Ruby mentioned as they approached the city skyline. I told them you were still with your sister and would be home today. Miss Brooke seemed particularly interested in when exactly you'd return. Vivian nodded, gazing out the window. I'm sure she was. When they arrived at the penthouse, Vivian carefully removed her hearing aids before entering. Dr. Chen had provided them as a precaution to help modulate sound levels as she adjusted. For now, they would serve a dual purpose: protection and disguise. To the outside world, she would remain deaf, reliant on lip reading and written communication. But beneath this facade, she would be absorbing every whisper, every aside, every secret conversation. Ruby, Vivian said as they settled in the living room, I need you to act exactly as before. Continue signing. Have me write notes to you occasionally when others are present. Nothing can seem different. Ruby frowned slightly. For how long, Mrs. Hargrove? Until I discover the full extent of what my family has been doing. Pierce mentioned moving money from my accounts. I need to know everything. That afternoon, Vivian called her longtime attorney, Stanford Walsh, asking him to come to the penthouse immediately. When he arrived, his tall frame stooped slightly with age. She revealed her newly regained hearing and swore him to secrecy before explaining her suspicions. I want a complete audit of all my accounts, properties, and holdings, she instructed, her voice firm. Discreetly. If anything has been moved or accessed improperly, I want to know. Stanford adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his expression grave. I'll have my team start immediately. If Pierce Westfield has been embezzling funds, we'll find the evidence. And I want to change my will, Vivian added, pacing the room. But don't file it yet. Prepare the documents, but keep them in your office safe until I give the word. After Stanford left, promising results within days, Vivian sat alone in William's old study, running her fingers over the mahogany desk where he had conducted business for decades. Oh, William, she whispered to the empty room, hearing her own voice with a clarity that still startled her. What would you make of all this? The intercom buzzed, and Ruby's voice came through. Mrs. Hargrove, Miss Brooke, and Mr. Westfield are here to see you. Vivian quickly removed her hearing aids, tucking them into her pocket. She took a deep breath, composing her features into the placid expression her family expected. Send them in, she responded, deliberately making her voice slightly too loud, as she had done for years. Brooke swept into the study, Pierce following closely behind. Both were dressed impeccably, as always. Brooke in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Pierce in a tailored suit that screamed old money and privilege. Mother, Brooke mouthed exaggeratedly, bending to kiss Vivian's cheek. How was Chicago? We were worried when you left so suddenly. Vivian reached for her notepad, writing, Lovely visit. My sister sends her regards. As she wrote, she could hear Brooke's impatient sigh, the soft tap of her manicured nails against her phone screen, the almost imperceptible whisper to Pierce. Let's make this quick. I have a charity luncheon at 2. The realization that she could hear these small, revealing moments sent a surge of emotion through Vivian. Heart vindication, heart deep sadness. For years, she had imagined her daughter's concern when they visited, interpreted their expressions as loving. Now, the curtain had been pulled back, revealing the uncomfortable truth behind their attentiveness. Pierce settled into the leather chair across from her. his charming smile firmly in place. "Vivian," he began, enunciating carefully as though speaking to a child, "we've been going over some of the business portfolios. There are several properties that aren't performing well. They're costing you money rather than generating income." Vivian tilted her head, playing the role of the confused elderly mother. She wrote, "Which properties?" "The commercial buildings downtown and 2 of the Hamptons houses," Pierce replied smoothly. "We think it would be wise to transfer them to Brooke and Tessa's names now. They can handle the headache, and it would reduce your estate tax burden significantly." Vivian could hear the slight tremor in his voice, the tell of a practiced liar. The downtown properties were among her most profitable holdings, generating millions in rental income annually. The underperforming Hamptons houses had recently been appraised at $7 million each. She wrote, "I'll think about it. Need to consult with Stanford first." Pierce's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at the mention of her attorney. "Stanford is getting on in years, Vivian. His understanding of modern tax strategy is limited. I'd be happy to meet with him. Explain our thinking." Brooke placed a hand on Vivian's shoulder, her voice honey-sweet, but with an underlying edge that Vivian had never been able to detect before. "Mother, we're just trying to help. You have so much to manage, and with your condition, it must be overwhelming." Vivian nodded meekly, allowing them to believe she was considering their proposal. She wrote, "Your thoughtful children. We'll discuss with Stanford next week." Bonsons, after they left, promising to return for Sunday dinner with Tessa and Griffin. Vivian stood at the window overlooking the city she and William had conquered together, the empire they had built from nothing, starting with a single run-down apartment building and expanding to dozens of premium properties across 3 states. Their legacy, the inheritance meant to secure their daughters' futures, not fund their extravagant lifestyles while Vivian was still alive. Ruby entered silently, placing a cup of tea on the side table. "They've gone, Mrs. Hargrove." Vivian turned, retrieving her hearing aids from her pocket. As she put them in, the world became even clearer. The gentle clink of the teacup against the saucer, the distant hum of traffic below, Ruby's concerned breathing. "They're trying to take everything, Ruby," Vivian said quietly. "Not just money from accounts. They want the properties transferred before I can change my will." She shook her head, a bitter smile crossing her lips. "Little do they know, I've already begun." That night, as Vivian lay in bed listening to the forgotten symphony of nighttime sounds, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the soft whir of the climate control system, the occasional car horn from the street below, she formulated her plan. Sunday dinner would be just the beginning. She would need patience, evidence, and perfect timing. Her family believed they were orchestrating a masterful scheme to secure their financial futures. They had no idea they were walking into a trap of Vivian's making, one that would expose not just their actions, but the true nature of their characters. As she drifted off to sleep, lulled by the sounds she had missed for so long, Vivian felt a strange sense of peace. The truth, however painful, was always preferable to illusion. By the time she was finished, everyone's true colors would be revealed, including her own. Sunday arrived with a pristine blue sky and a gentle breeze that rustled the ornamental trees on Vivian's penthouse terrace. For the 3rd consecutive day, she had awoken to the miraculous symphony of morning sounds, birdsong from outside her window, the distant hum of weekend traffic, the soft footfalls of Ruby preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Each new sound was a gift, a reconnection with a world she had feared lost forever. Vivian sat at her vanity, carefully applying her makeup with the practiced precision of a woman who had maintained her appearance impeccably, despite personal tragedies. The face that looked back at her from the mirror showed few signs of her 68 years. Silver hair styled in elegant waves, skin remarkably smooth, save for fine lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and tears. "Mrs. Hargrove," Ruby called from the doorway. "Stanford is on the phone." He says it's urgent. Vivian nodded, reaching for the receiver. Since regaining her hearing, phone conversations had become possible again, though she kept this development strictly between herself, Ruby, and her attorney. "Stanford," she said, her voice measured and calm. "What have you found?" The attorney's voice came through clearly, his professional tone tinged with unmistakable anger. "It's worse than we suspected, Vivian. Pierce has been systematically transferring funds from your investment accounts to offshore holdings for the past 14 months. Small amounts initially, but increasingly larger sums. The total is just over $2 million. Vivian's hand tightened on the receiver, but her expression remained impassive. "And the documentation? Irrefutable. He used your power of attorney to authorize the transfers, claiming they were for property renovations and maintenance. But we've verified with the management companies. Those renovations never happened. What about my daughters? Are their names on any of these transactions?" Stanford paused before responding. "Brooks is. She co-signed on several of the larger transfers. Tessa's name doesn't appear anywhere, but that doesn't necessarily mean she's unaware." A cold weight settled in Vivian's stomach. She had held out hope that perhaps Brooke was merely under Pierce's influence, that her eldest daughter wasn't actively participating in the theft. That hope now withered and died. "I've prepared the new will as you requested," Stanford continued, "and I've taken the liberty of drafting the documents to revoke Pierce's power of attorney, effective immediately. I can bring everything over tomorrow morning for your signature." "Thank you, Stanford. And the other matter we discussed? The trust restructuring is complete. Once you sign the documents, your monthly distributions to family members can be modified or terminated at your discretion without further paperwork." "Excellent. I'll see you tomorrow at 9. After hanging up, Vivian sat motionless, absorbing the confirmation of her worst fears. The betrayal cut deeper than she had anticipated. Not just Pierce, but she could almost understand. He had always been an opportunist, marrying Brooke more for her family connections than love, but Brooke herself actively participating in stealing from her mother. That wound would not heal easily. Ruby appeared with a cup of tea, her face etched with concern. "Bad news?" "Confirmation of what we suspected," Vivian replied, accepting the tea gratefully. $2 million, Ruby. Stolen while I sat in silence, unable to hear their schemes. Ruby placed a comforting hand on Vivian's shoulder. "What will you do now?" Vivian's eyes hardened as she looked out toward the terrace where the family would gather in a few hours. "Watch, listen, and then, when the moment is right, act decisively." The family began arriving at 4 o'clock for the weekly Sunday dinner tradition that had become more frequent since William's death. Tessa and Griffin arrived first, bringing an expensive bottle of wine that Vivian recognized as coming from her own cellar collection, likely borrowed during a previous visit. "Mother," Tessa mouthed carefully, embracing Vivian with a perfunctory hug. "You look well." Vivian nodded, patting Tessa's cheek affectionately, while noting the new diamond earrings adorning her younger daughter's ears, earrings that almost certainly had been purchased with misappropriated funds. She reached for her notepad, writing, "Lovely to see you both. Make yourselves comfortable." As Tessa and Griffin moved toward the living room, Vivian could hear their whispered conversation perfectly. "Did you talk to Brooke?" Griffin asked, his voice low and urgent. "About the offshore account access?" Tessa nodded slightly. "She says everything's on track. Once Mom signs the property transfer papers, we'll have leverage to get our names added to the bigger accounts." "Good. The business loan is due next month, and we're still $300,000 short. Your mother's money is our only option, unless you want to sell the house." Vivian turned away, her face a careful mask concealing the storm of emotions beneath. So, Tessa and Griffin were aware of the scheme. Perhaps not active participants in the embezzlement, but certainly planning to benefit from the broader plan to gain control of her assets. Brooke and Pierce arrived 20 minutes later, bringing their usual energy of barely concealed impatience. Brooke was dressed immaculately in a designer outfit, that Vivian estimated cost upwards of $5,000. Pierce carried a leather portfolio that immediately set Vivian's nerves on edge. Paperwork, no doubt, for her to sign. "Mother!" Brooke exclaimed with exaggerated clarity, air-kissing Vivian's cheeks. "I've brought the property documents we discussed. Very simple, just a few signatures needed." Vivian smiled placidly, gesturing toward the dining room where Ruby was setting out appetizers. She wrote on her notepad, "After dinner. Let's enjoy family time first." Pierce's expression tightened momentarily before he forced a smile. "Of course, Vivian. No rush at all." As they gathered around the dining table, Vivian observed her family with new clarity. Without the impediment of deafness, the dynamics were starkly apparent. The impatient glances exchanged between Brooke and Pierce whenever she took too long to respond to a question. The condescending way Griffin over-explained simple concepts as though she were intellectually, as well as hearing, impaired. The way Tessa checked her phone every few minutes, clearly bored by the obligation of dining with her mother. "So, Mother," Brooke began once the main course had been served, "have you given any more thought to our discussion about the properties?" Vivian tilted her head questioningly, pretending not to fully understand. She wrote, "Which properties?" Brooke's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "The ones we talked about transferring to Tessa and me. The underperforming properties that are causing you tax burdens." Vivian nodded slowly, then wrote, "Stanford mentioned something different about those properties. Very profitable," he said. The reaction around the table was immediate. Pierce's fork paused midway to his mouth. Brooke's smile froze in place. Griffin and Tessa exchanged alarmed glances. "Well," Pierce recovered smoothly, "Stanford isn't privy to all the financial details. I've been managing those properties more directly, and I can assure you they're becoming liabilities." Vivian could hear the slight elevation in his breathing, the telltale sign of a lie. She wrote, "Interesting. Stanford showed me the income reports yesterday. $7 million in rental revenue last quarter." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Brooke reached for her wine glass, taking a longer sip than necessary. "Mother, these financial details must be so confusing for you. Why don't you let us handle everything? You deserve to enjoy your retirement without these stresses." The condescension in her daughter's voice made Vivian's blood simmer, but she maintained her serene expression. She wrote, "Perhaps you're right. So much to keep track of. All those accounts, properties, investments." Pierce leaned forward, sensing an opening. "Exactly, Vivian. That's why we want to help, starting with transferring those problematic properties. I have the papers right here." He reached for the portfolio he'd brought. Vivian held up her hand, then wrote deliberately, "After dinner, and I'd like Stanford to review first." "Stanford is getting quite elderly, Mother," Brooke interjected quickly. "His understanding of modern estate planning is outdated. Pierce has consulted with the top experts." "Experts who recommended moving money to offshore accounts?" Vivian wrote, then watched their reactions carefully. The effect was electric. Pierce's face drained of color. Brooke's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Griffin's eyes widened in alarm, and Tessa suddenly became intensely interested in her plate. "I don't know what you mean," Pierce said finally, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying panic. Vivian smiled enigmatically and wrote, "Just something Stanford mentioned. Probably misunderstood. My mistake." The tension around the table was palpable as they finished dinner in relative silence. Vivian could hear their accelerated breathing, the whispered "later" from Pierce to Brooke, the nervous tap of Griffin's foot against the chair leg. For the first time, she had introduced doubt into their perfectly orchestrated plan. A suggestion that perhaps deaf, isolated Vivian wasn't quite as oblivious as they had assumed. After dinner, they moved to the living room for coffee. Pierce, recovering his composure, once again produced the property transfer documents. "Nothing complicated, Vivian. Just a simple transfer of deed to alleviate your tax burden." Vivian examined the papers with deliberate slowness, turning pages and appearing to read carefully. In reality, she had already spotted the deception. The simple transfer included not just the 2 Hamptons properties they had discussed, but 3 additional high-value commercial buildings and her beloved lake house in Vermont. She wrote, "These include more properties than we discussed." Pierce smiled smoothly. For maximum tax advantage, our advisors recommended grouping the transfers. It's all quite standard. Vivian nodded thoughtfully, then wrote, "I'll have Stanford review these tomorrow. He's coming at 9. "Tomorrow?" Brooke interjected, her voice sharper than intended. "Mother, these need to be filed by end of business Monday for the quarterly tax advantage. There's really no time for Stanford's review." "Such urgency for something supposedly routine," Vivian wrote, watching their expressions carefully. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken by Griffin attempting to change the subject. "The garden looks beautiful, Vivian. Those new rose bushes must have cost a fortune." "Speaking of money," Vivian wrote boldly, "has anyone seen the statement for my investment account? The one Pierce manages?" Stanford mentioned some discrepancies. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from uncomfortable to glacial. Pierce cleared his throat. "What sort of discrepancies?" "Missing funds," Vivian wrote simply, her gaze unwavering as she studied their reactions. Brooke jumped in, her voice artificially light. "Mother, there must be some misunderstanding. Pierce handles everything meticulously." "Yes," Pierce agreed quickly. "Perhaps Stanford is looking at outdated statements. I moved some investments to higher yield accounts recently. Completely documented, of course." "Of course," Vivian wrote, her face a mask of polite interest. The evening concluded earlier than usual, with transparent excuses about early meetings and children's activities. As the elevator doors closed behind her family, Vivian turned to Ruby, who had been observing quietly from the periphery. "Did you hear all that?" Vivian asked, inserting her hearing aids. Ruby nodded grimly. "Every word, Mrs. Hargrove. They're scared now." "Good," Vivian replied, moving to the window to watch as her family exited the building below. Through the perfect acoustics of her hearing aids, she could detect Pierce's angry phone call from the sidewalk, his voice carrying up through the open terrace doors. "She knows something," he was saying urgently. "We need to accelerate the plan. Get the rest of the money moved this week, before she can make changes." Vivian smiled grimly. "They're planning their next move, Ruby. But so am I." The following morning, Stanford arrived promptly at 9 with a thick folder of documents. His gray eyes were sharp behind his glasses, his handshake firm despite his 70-plus years. "The evidence is conclusive, Vivian," he said, spreading financial statements across the desk. "Pierce has been systematically draining smaller accounts, moving funds through a series of offshore holdings. The pattern suggests he was working up to larger transfers, testing to see if anyone would notice." "And Brooke?" Stanford's expression softened with sympathy. "Her signature is on these 4 transfers, each for $100,000. There's no ambiguity, I'm afraid." Vivian nodded, her face composed despite the pain coursing through her. "And the new arrangements?" "All prepared," Stanford confirmed, producing another set of documents. "Once you sign these, your daughter's monthly allowances will be placed in a discretionary trust under your sole control. The company cars, credit cards, property access, all can be revoked with a single phone call from you. And the new will? Drastically different from the current one, as you requested. The bulk of the estate goes to your charitable foundation, with modest trust funds for your daughters that they can only access at age 60, or in case of genuine medical emergency. The property holdings remain intact under foundation management." Vivian signed each document with a steady hand, her signature as elegant and controlled as ever. With each stroke of the pen, she was reclaiming the power that had been taken from her, not by deafness, but by the betrayal of those she had trusted most. "What will you do now?" Stanford asked, as he gathered the signed documents. Vivian's gaze drifted to the family photograph on her desk, taken years ago when William was alive and the girls were younger, a time when she believed family meant loyalty, not opportunity. "Now," she said quietly, "I wait for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. And when I do, nothing will ever be the same again. 3 days passed in a storm of activity that went entirely unnoticed by Vivian's family. Stanford's team worked with surgical precision, documenting every unauthorized transaction, changing account access protocols, and implementing the new trust structures that would fundamentally alter the financial dynamics of the Hargrove family. Through it all, Vivian maintained her facade of deaf vulnerability, communicating with her daughters via brief text messages that gave no hint of the seismic shifts occurring beneath the surface. On Wednesday afternoon, Vivian sat in Dr. Nathaniel Chen's office for her one-week follow-up appointment, a small smile playing at her lips as he reviewed her test results. "Remarkable," Dr. Chen said, genuine amazement in his voice. "Your auditory recovery has exceeded our most optimistic projections. You're currently testing at 95% of normal hearing capacity across all frequencies. For someone who was profoundly deaf for 12 years, these results are nothing short of miraculous." Vivian nodded, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "The sounds are so clear now, even better than I remember from before. The neural pathways have adapted exceptionally well," Dr. Chen explained, setting aside her chart. "And how are you adjusting psychologically? Reintegrating sound can be overwhelming for long-term deaf patients. It's been—" Vivian paused, searching for the right words. "Illuminating. I'm hearing things I never expected to hear." Dr. Chen nodded sympathetically, misinterpreting her meaning. "That's common. Many patients report being surprised by sounds they'd forgotten. Refrigerator hums, clock ticks, their own footsteps." "Yes, those too," Vivian agreed, not bothering to explain that the most surprising sounds had been the calculating discussions of her family when they thought she couldn't hear them. "Have you told your family yet?" Dr. Chen asked. "Support from loved ones is crucial during this transition." Vivian's expression remained placid, betraying none of the turmoil beneath. "Not yet. I'm waiting for the right moment." As Ruby drove her home from the appointment, Vivian gazed out at the city streets, her mind working through the final details of her plan. "Ruby, I'd like you to call my daughters. Invite them and their husbands for dinner on Friday night. Tell them I have important financial matters to discuss." Ruby glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "All of them together? Are you sure that's wise?" "Absolutely." Vivian's voice carried a steely determination that brooked no argument. "It's time to end this charade. On Friday night, everyone's masks will come off, including mine." When they arrived at the penthouse, Vivian was surprised to find Tessa waiting in the lobby, pacing nervously near the private elevator. Upon seeing her mother, Tessa rushed forward, her expression a careful mask of daughterly concern. "Mother! I've been trying to reach you all day," she exclaimed, the words exaggerated for lip reading. "We've been so worried." Vivian tilted her head questioningly, reaching for the small notepad in her purse. "Your appointment," Tessa continued, watching Vivian's face closely. "Brooke and I called the house, and Ruby said you were at a doctor's appointment. Is everything okay? Are you sick?" Vivian could hear the underlying tension in her daughter's voice. Not genuine concern for her health, but fear that an illness might complicate their financial schemes. She wrote calmly, "Routine checkup. Nothing to worry about." Relief washed visibly over Tessa's features. "Oh, thank goodness. You should have told us. We worry when we can't reach you." As they rode the elevator to the penthouse, Vivian observed her younger daughter surreptitiously. Tessa had always been the more sensitive of her children, more easily influenced by others. Growing up, she had followed Brooke's lead in everything from fashion choices to career decisions. Apparently, this pattern had extended to financial exploitation as well. Inside the penthouse, Tessa declined Ruby's offer of tea, indicating she couldn't stay long. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right," she explained to Vivian, "and to ask if you've had time to look over those property documents Pierce left. He mentioned you were going to sign them after Stanford reviewed them." Vivian wrote, "Stanford advised against the transfers. Said they would benefit you, not me." Tessa's smile faltered. "Mother, That's not true at all. This is entirely for your benefit. Tax advantages. Reduced management responsibilities. Pierce has consulted multiple experts. Experts who recommend hiding money offshore, Vivian wrote, her gaze steady as she watched her daughter's reaction. Color drained from Tessa's face. I'm not sure what you mean, Vivian wrote deliberately. Stanford found the missing money, Tessa. $2 million. Transferred by Pierce with Brooks' signatures. I had nothing to do with that, Tessa whispered, forgetting to enunciate clearly for Vivian's supposed lip-reading. That was their idea, not mine. Griffin and I just needed a loan for the business. We were going to pay it back. Vivian could hear the panic in her daughter's voice, the slight tremor that betrayed her guilt. She wrote, "We'll discuss everything Friday night. Family dinner at 7. Please make sure everyone attends." Tessa nodded jerkily, already pulling out her phone, presumably to alert the others. She kissed Vivian's cheek hastily before departing, her usual grace absent in her hurry to escape the uncomfortable confrontation. After Tessa left, Ruby approached with a concerned expression. She looked terrified, Mrs. Hargrove. "She should be," Vivian replied, removing her hearing aids now that they were alone. "They all should be." The next day passed in meticulous preparation. Vivian reviewed the extensive documentation Stanford had provided, familiarizing herself with every detail of Pierce and Brooks' financial manipulations. She scheduled transfers to reverse their embezzlement, ready to be executed with a single phone call. She arranged for company security to change the locks and access codes at all Hargrove properties effective Saturday morning. By Friday afternoon, everything was in place. Ruby had prepared an elaborate dinner, all of Vivian's signature dishes that she had taught the housekeeper over their 30 years together. The dining room was immaculate, the table set with the finest china and crystal, William's portrait watching over the proceedings from its place of honor on the wall. "They're here, Mrs. Hargrove," Ruby announced at precisely 7 o'clock. "All 4 of them, arriving together." Vivian nodded, smoothing her dress, a stunning sapphire blue that complemented her silver hair and brought out the steel in her eyes. "Show them in, Ruby. And remember, until I give the signal, nothing has changed. I'm still deaf to them." The family entered with uncharacteristic hesitation, their usual confident demeanor replaced by wary calculation. Brooke led the way, dressed immaculately as always, though Vivian noted her daughter's white-knuckled grip on her designer handbag. Pierce followed, his corporate smile firmly in place, but strain evident around his eyes. Griffin and Tessa entered last, both looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Mother," Brooke greeted with exaggerated clarity, kissing Vivian's cheek. "You look lovely tonight. Special occasion?" Vivian smiled enigmatically and wrote on her notepad, "Family is always a special occasion. Shall we eat first, or would you prefer to discuss business immediately?" The 4 exchanged glances before Pierce stepped forward. "Perhaps we should clear the air first, Vivian. There seems to be some misunderstanding about the financial arrangements." Vivian nodded and gestured toward the living room, where she had arranged documents on the coffee table. As they seated themselves, she could hear their accelerated breathing, the nervous tap of Brooks' heel against the hardwood floor, the whispered, "Let me handle this," from Pierce to Griffin. Pierce began his well-rehearsed explanation, his voice smooth with practiced sincerity. "Vivian, Stanford may have misinterpreted some of the financial movements in your accounts. Yes, I've transferred funds between various holdings, but always with the goal of maximizing your returns and minimizing tax exposure. These offshore accounts are perfectly legal tax havens used by wealthy families worldwide." Vivian watched him impassively, then wrote, "And the $2 million? Temporary transfers," Pierce replied without missing a beat. "Capital being positioned for a major investment opportunity. Every penny is accounted for and working for your benefit." Brooke leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Mother, you know we would never do anything to harm you financially. Everything we've done has been to protect your estate, our family legacy." Vivian wrote, "Then you won't mind if we review the documents together." She gestured to the stack of papers on the table. A flicker of alarm crossed Pierce's face. "These are complex financial instruments, Vivian. Without the proper background, they can be very confusing." "Try me," Vivian wrote, her expression challenging. For the next 20 minutes, Pierce attempted to explain away the damning evidence Stanford had compiled, weaving an increasingly convoluted narrative of investment strategies and tax planning. Throughout his explanation, Vivian remained silent, watching as he dug himself deeper with each deception. Finally, when Pierce finished his elaborate justification, Vivian stood up and walked to the bar cart in the corner of the room. She poured herself a small measure of William's favorite scotch, feeling 4 pairs of eyes tracking her movements with growing confusion. "Mrs. Hargrove," Ruby said from the doorway, "right on cue. Shall I serve dinner now?" Vivian turned to face her family, taking a small sip of the scotch before responding. Not in writing, but in a clear, steady voice. "I think we'll wait a bit longer, Ruby. We're just getting to the interesting part." The effect was instantaneous. 4 pairs of eyes widened in shock. Brooke's mouth fell open. Pierce froze mid-gesture. Griffin actually stood up in surprise before awkwardly sitting back down. "Mother," Tessa whispered, "you can hear us." "Perfectly," Vivian replied, her voice calm and measured. "I've been able to hear everything for over a week now. Every whisper, every aside, every plan discussed when you thought I couldn't possibly know what you were saying." "But how?" Brooke stammered, her composure shattered. "An experimental procedure," Vivian explained, moving back to her seat with deliberate grace. "Microchip implants combined with nerve regeneration therapy. Quite revolutionary. Dr. Chen believes it might help thousands of people with hearing loss similar to mine." "And you didn't tell us?" Brooke's voice carried an accusatory tone that made Vivian's eyebrows rise. "Why would I?" Vivian asked softly. "So you could be more careful about what you said behind my back? So Pierce could be sure to make his calls about offshore accounts from a safer distance?" Pierce attempted to regain control of the situation. "Vivian, I understand this must seem suspicious, but if you'll allow me to explain—" "Enough!" Vivian cut him off, her voice sharper now. "I've heard all your explanations, Pierce. I've listened to you plot with my daughter to steal my money. I've heard you discuss which properties to take first. I've heard you call me a confused old woman who won't notice what you're doing." She turned to Brooke. "I heard you complain about how exhausting it is to communicate with your deaf mother, how inconvenient my disability has been for you, how eager you are for me to sign everything over so you don't have to pretend to care anymore." Brooke's face flushed red. "That's not fair. You're taking things out of context." "Am I?" Vivian countered. "Then let me provide some context. Stanford has documented 67 unauthorized transfers from my accounts over the past 14 months, totaling $2,300,000. 43 of these transfers bear your signature, Brooke, not Pierce's, yours." She turned to Tessa and Griffin. "And while you two may not have actively stolen from me, I heard you discussing how to use the property transfers as leverage to gain access to my larger accounts. I heard Griffin mention using my money to cover the $300,000 business loan that's coming due." Tessa began to cry, mascara tracking down her cheeks. "Mother, please. We were desperate. The business was failing, and we didn't know where else to turn." "You could have asked me," Vivian said, her voice softening slightly. "I would have helped you, openly, legally, without the need for manipulation and lies." A heavy silence fell over the room. Pierce, ever the strategist, was the first to recover. "What happens now, Vivian? What do you want from us?" Vivian set down her glass and folded her hands in her lap. "As of this morning, several things have changed. First, Pierce no longer has power of attorney over any of my affairs. Stanford has revoked all access to my accounts. The $2 million has been recovered from the offshore holdings and returned to my primary accounts." She paused, making eye contact with each family member before continuing. Second, I've established a new trust structure. The monthly allowances you've all enjoyed, $5,000 each for Brooke and Tessa, company cars, credit cards, access to vacation properties, all of that now falls under a discretionary trust that I control entirely. You're cutting us off? Brooke asked incredulously. Effective immediately, Vivian confirmed. The company cars will be collected tomorrow morning. The credit cards have already been deactivated. The security codes at all properties will be changed by noon. You can't do this, Pierce protested, his composure finally cracking. We have rights. We've built lives around those resources. Resources you were actively stealing, Vivian reminded him coldly. Consider yourselves fortunate that I'm not pressing criminal charges for the embezzlement. Stanford advised me to do exactly that, particularly in your case, Pierce. This is insane, Griffin interjected. You're punishing us all because of Pierce and Brooke's actions. Tessa and I weren't involved in the transfers. But you knew, Vivian replied simply. You knew, and you planned to benefit. You discussed it openly in my presence, believing I couldn't hear you. She stood again, moving to the window that overlooked the city lights. For 12 years, I lived in silence, trusting that my family would protect my interests, honor the legacy your father and I built. Instead, you saw my disability as an opportunity to enrich yourselves. Turning back to face them, Vivian's expression hardened. Starting tomorrow, you will all learn what it means to support yourselves without the Hargrove fortune backing you. Get jobs, earn your own way, discover the value of what you've taken for granted. And if we refuse, Brooke challenged, her voice thick with emotion, then you'll have nothing, Vivian stated simply. The new will I signed this morning leaves the bulk of my estate to the charitable foundation. Only if you demonstrate genuine change over the next year will I consider reinstating your inheritances. Pierce stood abruptly. This is emotional blackmail. You can't hold your money over our heads like this. Actually, I can, Vivian replied calmly. It's my money, Pierce. Money that William and I earned through decades of hard work and careful investment. Money you tried to steal. She moved toward the dining room. Now, Ruby has prepared a lovely dinner. You're welcome to stay and eat, or you can leave. The choice is yours. But understand this. The financial dynamics of this family have changed permanently. How we proceed from here is entirely up to you. Without waiting for their response, Vivian walked into the dining room, her head held high, her steps measured and confident. Behind her, she could hear the stunned silence of her family as they faced a future suddenly stripped of financial certainty. A future where, for the first time in their adult lives, they would have to make their own way without the safety net of Vivian's fortune. The reckoning had begun. The morning after Vivian's revelation dawned crisp and clear, the autumn sunshine streaming through the penthouse windows with unforgiving brightness. Vivian sat at the breakfast table, savoring the sounds that once again filled her world, the gentle clink of her teacup against its saucer, the rustle of newspaper pages as she read the financial section, the distant hum of city traffic 30 floors below. These ordinary sounds had become extraordinary gifts, each one a reminder of what she had regained. Ruby entered with fresh toast, her steps deliberately heavier than usual, an old habit from when she needed to alert Vivian to her presence. Mrs. Hargrove, Stanford called. The security changes at all properties have been completed, and the company cars have been retrieved from Mr. Westfield and Mr. Clayton. Thank you, Ruby, Vivian replied, folding the newspaper carefully. Any word from my daughters? Miss Tessa called twice this morning. She was quite upset. Miss Brooke sent a text message. Rather terse, I'm afraid. Vivian nodded, unsurprised. Last night's dinner had concluded in strained silence after her announcement. Pierce and Brooke had departed immediately, refusing to stay for the meal, their expressions a mixture of fury and disbelief. Tessa and Griffin had remained, picking at their food while attempting awkward conversation, as though they could somehow normalize the seismic shift that had just occurred. "What happens now, Mrs. Hargrove?" Ruby asked, her voice gentle as she poured more tea. Vivian gazed out at the city skyline, considering the question. "Now we wait, Ruby. People reveal their true character, not when life is easy, but when they face genuine adversity. My family has never known adversity. Perhaps it's time they did." The weeks that followed unfolded exactly as Vivian had anticipated. Pierce was the first to crack under the pressure of financial reality. Without access to Hargrove funds, his carefully cultivated image of success began to crumble. His luxury car repossessed, his credit cards declined, his country club membership lapsed. Each loss was another blow to his ego. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Brooke appeared at the penthouse, her designer outfit replaced by simpler attire, her usual perfect makeup slightly less polished. "Mother," she began, as she settled onto the sofa across from Vivian, "I've come to apologize." Vivian regarded her eldest daughter with a measured gaze, saying nothing, allowing the uncomfortable silence to stretch between them. "What happened with the accounts was wrong," Brooke continued, her voice strained. "I should never have signed those transfer documents. Pierce convinced me they were temporary moves. Strategic repositioning, he called it. I knew better, but I went along with it." "Why?" Vivian asked simply. Brooke's composure faltered slightly. "Because it was easy. Because we'd grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle. Because—" she hesitated, then continued more quietly. "Because Pierce threatened to leave if I didn't help him. Our marriage has been struggling for years, Mother. The money was the only thing holding us together." Vivian absorbed this confession, noting the absence of genuine remorse for the betrayal itself. Brooke was sorry for the consequences, not for the actions that had brought them about. "Where is Pierce now?" Vivian inquired, though she already knew the answer from Stanford's reports. "Gone," Brooke replied, a bitter edge to her voice. "He left last week, said if he couldn't access your money, there was no point in staying. 20 years of marriage, and that's what it came down to." Despite everything, Vivian felt a pang of sympathy for her daughter. "I'm sorry your marriage ended that way, Brooke. Truly." "Are you?" Brooke challenged, a flash of her old defiance returning. "Isn't this exactly what you wanted? To punish us all?" "No," Vivian replied calmly. "What I wanted was honesty, respect, a family that valued me for more than my money. The punishment you're experiencing now is simply the natural consequence of your own choices." Brooke's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I need help, Mother. I've never had to support myself before. I don't even know where to begin." Vivian studied her daughter thoughtfully. Behind the entitlement and manipulation, she glimpsed something she hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. Perhaps there was hope for Brooke after all. "Stanford has arranged an entry-level position at Hargrove Properties," Vivian said finally, "assistant to the marketing director. The pay is modest but fair. You'll report to work like everyone else, be evaluated on your performance like everyone else. No special treatment." "You want me to work for the company?" Brooke asked incredulously. "As an assistant? I want you to earn your way, for once in your life," Vivian corrected her. "To understand the value of honest work, to appreciate what your father and I built from nothing." After a long moment, Brooke nodded reluctantly. "When do I start?" "Monday, 8 o'clock sharp. Don't be late." As Brooke left, Vivian wondered if her daughter would actually show up on Monday, or if her pride would prevent her from accepting such a humbling position. The answer came at 8:15 Monday morning, when Stanford called to inform her that Brooke had arrived at the office. 15 minutes late, but present nonetheless. It was a small step, but a step in the right direction. Tessa and Griffin's situation evolved differently. With their business loan coming due and no Hargrove funds to cover it, they faced the very real possibility of bankruptcy. The boutique marketing agency they had started 3 years ago had never been profitable, sustained only by Vivian's regular infusions of capital that they had positioned as investments. 2 months after the confrontation, Tessa arrived at the penthouse, visibly exhausted. dark circles under her eyes. "We lost the business," she admitted, after Ruby had shown her in. "The bank foreclosed last week. We couldn't make the loan payments." "I'm sorry to hear that," Vivian said, and meant it. Unlike Brooke and Pierce's manipulations, Tessa and Griffin's business had at least been a genuine attempt to create something of their own, however financially naive. "Griffin's been interviewing for corporate jobs," Tessa continued, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "He actually got an offer yesterday. Not much money, but it's a start, and I've started designing websites freelance. Small projects, but I'm building a portfolio." Vivian felt a surge of pride at her younger daughter's resilience. "That's commendable, Tessa. Both of you. We've had to downsize everything," Tessa went on. "Moved out of the house into a small apartment. Sold a lot of stuff. It's been humbling, but also clarifying in a way." She looked up at her mother, genuine remorse in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mom. Not just for going along with Pierce and Brooke's schemes, but for taking you for granted all these years, for seeing you as a source of money rather than as a person." The simple sincerity of the apology and the rare use of Mom instead of the more formal Mother touched Vivian deeply. This was what she had been hoping for. Not just the struggle, but the growth that could come from it. "Thank you for saying that," Vivian responded, reaching out to squeeze her daughter's hand. "It means a great deal to me." "Griffin and I have been talking," Tessa said hesitantly, "about how we treated you after you lost your hearing, how impatient we were, how we never really tried to learn sign language or find better ways to communicate. We just took the path of least resistance, and that wasn't fair to you." "Life rarely gives us second chances," Vivian said softly, "but when it does, the wise seize them with both hands." Over the following months, a new pattern emerged. Brooke, surprisingly, excelled in her role at Hargrove Properties. Her natural charm and social connections proved valuable in the marketing department, and her willingness to work hard, a trait Vivian hadn't seen since Brooke was a child, earned her the respect of colleagues who had initially viewed her with skepticism. Tessa and Griffin struggled more with the practical aspects of financial independence, but their marriage strengthened through the adversity. They visited Vivian regularly, not asking for money but seeking advice, gradually rebuilding the relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial dependence. Pierce, true to form, attempted to fight back. He hired an attorney, claiming rights to Hargrove assets through his marriage to Brooke. Stanford easily dismantled these claims, pointing to the ironclad prenuptial agreement Pierce had signed 20 years earlier. When legal maneuvering failed, Pierce resorted to threats, first legal, then personal. Each attempt was met with the implacable wall of Vivian's resolve, until finally he disappeared from their lives entirely. Last heard from in Dubai, attempting to charm a new wealthy widow. 6 months after the confrontation, Vivian invited her daughters to the penthouse for a private dinner. No husbands, no Ruby, just the 3 Hargrove women. She prepared the meal herself, a skill she had once excelled at but rarely practiced in recent years. "This is delicious, Mom," Tessa said warmly as they enjoyed Vivian's signature roast. "I'd forgotten what an amazing cook you are." "Your father always said I could have been a chef in another life," Vivian replied with a smile, the memory of William bringing warmth rather than pain for the first time in years. "I remember Dad bragging about your cooking to his business associates," Brooke added, her expression softening at the memory. "He was always so proud of you, of everything you did." "We built everything together," Vivian said, looking around the penthouse that held so many memories. Equal partners from the very beginning, when all we had was a run-down apartment building and more ambition than sense. As they lingered over dessert, Vivian studied her daughters' faces, noting the changes these months of independence had wrought. Brooke's features had lost their brittle edge, replaced by a more genuine confidence born of actual accomplishment. Tessa's perpetual anxiety had given way to a calm self-assurance that reminded Vivian of William. "I have something to tell you both," Vivian said, as they moved to the living room with coffee. I've made another change to my will." Both daughters tensed visibly, exchanging apprehensive glances. "Not what you're thinking," Vivian assured them with a gentle smile. "I've reinstated your inheritances, with conditions. The bulk of the estate will still go to the foundation, but you'll each receive trust funds sufficient to provide security, without enabling the kind of lifestyle that proved so problematic before." "Mom, we don't expect," Tessa began, but Vivian held up her hand. "I know you don't, and that's precisely why I'm doing this. You've both shown genuine growth these past months. You've earned back my trust, step by step." Tears welled in Brooke's eyes. Real emotion, not the calculated displays Vivian had grown accustomed to. "Thank you for not giving up on us," she said quietly. "When all this happened, I was so angry. I blamed you for everything, but you were right. We needed this wake-up call." "I never gave up on you," Vivian replied. "I simply needed to see who you really were, beneath the entitlement and dependency, and I needed you to see it too." The conversation shifted to lighter topics. Brooke's recent promotion, Tessa's growing freelance business, Griffin's adjustment to corporate life. As they talked and laughed with an ease that had been absent for years, Vivian realized that her hearing wasn't the only thing that had been restored. Something far more precious had been reclaimed, the authentic connection with her daughters that money and manipulation had nearly destroyed. Later that evening, after her daughters had departed with genuine hugs and promises to return soon, Vivian stood on her terrace overlooking the glittering city. Ruby joined her, bringing a light shawl against the evening chill. "They've changed, haven't they?" Ruby observed, having watched the family drama unfold from her unique vantage point. "They have," Vivian agreed. "Not completely. Change never happens overnight. But they're on a better path now. And you, Mrs. Hargrove, how are you feeling about everything?" Vivian considered the question, listening to the symphony of city sounds that surrounded her. Car horns, distant music, the rustle of leaves in the terrace garden. Each sound a gift, a connection to the world she had once feared lost forever. "I feel," she paused, searching for the right word, "whole. For the first time in many years, I feel whole." 6 months later, on a bright spring morning, Vivian stood before a gathering of journalists, medical professionals, and patients at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Hargrove Center for Auditory Restoration. The state-of-the-art facility, funded entirely by her foundation, would make Dr. Chen's groundbreaking procedure available to hearing-impaired patients regardless of their financial circumstances. "My own journey from silence back to sound taught me many things," Vivian said into the microphone, her voice clear and confident. "Chief among them is that while hearing connects us to the world, understanding connects us to each other. Sometimes we must lose something precious to recognize what truly matters." In the front row, Brooke and Tessa sat with proud smiles, applauding their mother's speech. Behind them, Ruby dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. And somewhere, Vivian liked to think, William was watching too, approving of the woman she had become, stronger, wiser, and finally at peace with both silence and sound. As she cut the ceremonial ribbon, flashbulbs popping around her, Vivian Hargrove smiled at the beautiful irony of it all. Her deafness, once her greatest vulnerability, had ultimately been her salvation, revealing hard truths, forcing difficult choices, and ultimately restoring not just her hearing, but her family. Some revelations came in thunderous moments of clarity. Others whispered their way into consciousness. But it was only when you truly listened, with your ears and your heart, that you could hear the truth that had been there all along. In the silence, she had learned to listen. In the listening, she had found her voice. And in finding her voice, she had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of all those she touched. Not through her wealth or her power, but through the simplest and most profound of human gifts, the courage to face the truth, whatever it might reveal. Thank you all for being here today. Vivian concluded, her gaze encompassing the crowd, but lingering on her daughters. This center represents not just medical innovation, but the power of second chances. May it help others find their way back from silence, just as I found mine. The applause that followed was thunderous, a beautiful cacophony of sound that washed over Vivian like a blessing. Once, such noise would have been lost to her. Now, she heard every nuance, every variation, every individual contribution to the whole. Just as she now saw her family clearly. Not perfect, not entirely healed, but genuinely transformed by the crucible of truth they had endured together. As she descended from the podium to join her daughters, Vivian's heart swelled with gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them here. The silence had revealed what words could not. The truth had hurt, then healed, and the love that remained, tested, tempered, and true, was stronger than anything money could buy or deception could destroy. Some called it a miracle that Vivian Hargrove had regained her hearing after 12 years of silence. But the real miracle, she knew, was finding the courage to listen to the truth and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes the most important things in life are heard not with the ears, but with the heart. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.